Stop this ceremony right now.
She was already in the white suit when she found out. Not the gown. The gown was hanging on the back of the bridal suite door, still perfectly pressed, still waiting for a woman who no longer existed. Zola stood at the vanity mirror in a razor-sharp, double-breasted white blazer and high-waisted trousers, having decided 40 minutes ago that she was done being soft, done being decorative, done being chosen. The earpiece had been handed to her as a routine sound check, the AV technician muttering something about the live feed for the videographer. But when Zola slid it in, the first thing she heard was not music. It was not Evander rehearsing his vows. It was the sound of her maid of honor laughing in the room directly above her, followed by Evander's voice, low and greedy and unmistakably his. 3 more hours. That's all I need. We get through the ceremony. The trust fund unlocks by midnight, and I clear the whole ledger with the Koreans. Then I'm free. And Zola? Calliope asked. Zola is a business problem I solve today and dissolve in a year. The room didn't spin. Zola's hands didn't shake. The betrayal didn't arrive as grief. It arrived as absolute crystalline clarity. Like the moment a surgeon finally sees exactly where to cut. She looked at the AV technician. He was young, nervous, holding a tablet like a shield. I need you to reroute this audio feed to the chapel's main speaker system, she said. Her voice was calm in the way that a courtroom is calm right before a verdict. All speakers, maximum volume. Do it now, and I will tip you enough to cover next semester's tuition. He did it in 45 seconds. 300 guests rose to their feet when the chapel doors opened. They expected a bride in white lace, trembling and radiant, flowers in her hands and tears in her eyes. What they got was Zola Adeyemi Cross walking down the aisle like she owned the building, the city, and every soul in it. Chin up, posture immaculate, the white power. Suit cutting a silhouette so sharp it could draw blood. She held no bouquet. She held a microphone. She could see the confusion spreading through the pews like water through a crack. She could see Evander at the altar, handsome, polished, completely unsuspecting, his smile still in place, still performing the role of devoted groom for the cameras. She could see Calliope frozen in the maid of honor position, face pale as primer. And she could see, in the very last row of the chapel, half shrouded in shadow, utterly still, watching her the way a predator watches something it has not yet decided to pursue, a man she did not recognize. He was devastatingly well-dressed, all dark tailored suit and an unbuttoned white collar that exposed the edge of something dark and intricate creeping up his neck. Ink that looked less like decoration and more like a warning written in a language most people weren't meant to read. His cheekbones were carved, his jaw was set, his expression was the kind of total, undisturbed stillness that didn't come from peace. It came from power. The kind of man who never needed to raise his voice because the room always went quiet when he entered it. Zola filed him away in the back of her mind and kept walking. She reached the altar. She stopped. She looked at Evander for a long, unhurried moment, the way you look at something you once loved before you put it down permanently. Then she raised the microphone. Before this officiant says a single word, Zola said, her voice amplified through every speaker in the chapel, smooth and devastatingly composed. I think you all deserve to hear what the groom told my maid of honor 40 minutes ago. Since his microphone is still live, I had the feed connected to the main speakers. You'll want to pay close attention. The recording played. Evander's voice filled the chapel like a verdict. Every syllable, every laugh, every calculated mercenary word. The silence that followed was absolute. Zola turned, to face 300 people. She smiled, not the warm, grateful smile she had practiced in the mirror. Something far more dangerous. Evander, she said, we're done. But I still need a husband today. My father's trust requires a marriage certificate signed before midnight. So I'm going to do something a little unconventional. She looked out at the congregation. Is there any man in this room willing to marry me? Right now. Today. On record. Every man in the chapel looked at the floor, except one. In the very back row, the man in the dark suit, the one with the tattooed neck and the stillness of something ancient and dangerous, rose slowly to his feet. The entire room turned to look at him. He didn't smile. He didn't posture. He simply looked at Zola the way you look at something you have already decided to keep, and said two words with the quiet certainty of someone who had never been told no in his life. I will. His name, she would learn within the hour, was Ji Hoon. And the reason he had been sitting in the back of her wedding was that Evander owed him $4 million. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. The recording lasted 41 seconds. Zola knew this because she had counted them in the bridal suite, each one landing like a chisel against stone, not breaking her, but carving something out of her. Something that had no name yet. Something that stood with perfect posture and held a microphone, and did not apologize for the wreckage it was about to make. The chapel's speakers were excellent. Whoever had designed this room had designed it for God's voice to carry. Today they carried Evander's. Every syllable, every calculated laugh, every syllable of a business problem I dissolve in a year. To the farthest pew, the highest balcony, the ears of his mother sitting in the front row, with her hat and her pearls and her expression collapsing in real time. Zola watched his face. Evander was not a man who lost control easily. He was smooth in the way that things coated in oil are smooth. Frictionless, hard to grasp, easy to underestimate. But there was a half second, somewhere between the word ledger and the word free, where the mask simply stopped working, where his eyes went from performing a wedding to registering a catastrophe, and the gap between those two expressions was so vast and so sudden that the people watching him up close would describe it later as though they'd watched a building begin to fall. 300 people did not breathe. Zola let the silence sit. She had earned every second of it. Evander, she said, her voice carrying with the same effortless amplification as the recording. You are released from the engagement, from the ceremony, and from any future access to my father's estate. The lawyers will handle the rest. Someone in the third pew started crying. Zola didn't. Look to see who? She was already turning. But since I still need a husband today, she said to the full congregation and let that land before continuing. And since my father's trust requires a marriage certificate signed before midnight, I'm going to ask this room a straightforward question. The silence changed quality. It became something with weight. Is there any man in this room willing to marry me? Right now. Legally. On record. 400 eyes went to the floor, except one pair. In the very last row, half swallowed by the shadow of the stone archway, the man in the dark suit stood. He did it without performance, no dramatic rise, no theatrical pause. He simply unfolded himself from the pew with the deliberateness of a man who had already made this decision well before the question was asked, and he looked at Zola across the full length of that flower-draped, breath-held room. I will. 2 words. Absolute as a door closing. Evander found his voice from somewhere, near the altar, cracked, urgent, stripped of every layer of polish. Wait, you don't know who that is? Zola, listen to me. She didn't. His name was Ji Hoon Kwon. She learned this the way she learned everything about him for the first 11 days. In pieces, each one revealing a corner of a picture so large she had to keep adjusting her sense of how far back to stand. The efficient, pale, sweating in the particular way of a man whose seminary training had genuinely not covered this scenario, asked for the name while filling out the marriage license at the altar table. Ji Hoon crossed the chapel in the manner of someone walking through a space that belonged to him and had simply not been told yet, and he signed the document without reading it first. She noticed that. The not reading. It meant he had already calculated every clause. Evander tried twice. The first time, he grabbed Zola's arm just above the elbow. His fingers pressed too hard, fear converting itself into physical force he could no longer calibrate. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said, his voice pitching in a way she had never heard before. Tight. Cornered. "You have no idea who he is." Ji Hoon set down the pen. He turned. He looked at Evander with the patient clinical attention of a man identifying something very small in a very large room, and he said, "Remove your hand from my wife." Here's what she didn't know about Korean syndicate hierarchies then. The word wife, in that context, was not an endearment. It was a property designation. It was a line drawn in the air of the chapel that every person present understood, at a frequency below conscious thought, meant, this person is under my authority now, and touching her is touching me, and you already know what happens to people who touch me. Evander released her arm. The second attempt was quieter. He moved toward the altar table, some half-formed plan involving the unsigned certificate, and then stopped. Ji Hoon's two associates had appeared at the doors with the seamless efficiency of men trained to materialize exactly when needed. Evander looked at them, something in his chest visibly deflated. Zola signed the certificate. Ji Hoon signed it. The officiant's hand trembled slightly as he dated it and pressed his seal. 300 people watched in the stunned silence of those witnessing something they would spend the rest of their lives struggling to accurately describe. Outside, there was a Maybach. Black. The kind of clean that suggested it had never once sat in ordinary traffic. The driver held the rear door with the practiced stillness of someone for whom waiting was not an inconvenience, but a professional discipline. Zola got in. The door closed behind her, dense, vault-thick, the sound of the outside world being engineered away. Ji Hoon sat beside her, one arm resting along the window ledge. Posture entirely undisturbed, as though marrying a stranger at her ex-fiancé's ruined wedding was simply a Tuesday for him. The city began sliding past the tinted windows. "Who are you?" she asked. A pause. Not the pause of a man deciding whether to answer, the pause of a man deciding how much of the answer to give. "The person Evander owes $4 million, he said, "and now, your husband." She told herself she was not afraid. She was not. But she was something adjacent to it. Something that felt like standing at the edge of a very high place and looking down not with terror, but with the specific, full-body awareness of exactly how far there was to fall. She had expected something aggressive. Men who controlled cities tended to live in spaces that announced it. All marble and sharp lighting and rooms designed to make visitors feel small. Zola had braced for that, had built her posture against it in the back of the Maybach, vertebra by vertebra. The compound did not cooperate. It was in the northern hills behind 3 authorization gates and a camera system she counted. Automatically, she had always cataloged exits, a habit her father had called useful and her ex-fiancé had called exhausting. But the house itself was architecturally severe in its restraint. Enormous? Yes. Fortified in ways that only revealed themselves on second examination. But the bones of it were pale concrete and floor-to-ceiling glass, facing the city below, with the calm, territorial certainty of something that had never needed to announce itself because it already owned the view. Zola stood in the entrance hall and counted 6 men who were almost certainly armed. She made no visible note of this. "You should sit," Ji Hoon said. "I don't want to sit," she said. He looked at her. a look she was beginning to catalog, the kind that moved across a face without disturbing it, taking in everything and returning nothing, and then gave the smallest possible nod. She took it to mean, noted. He told her everything without embellishment, without apology, without checking her face for signs of distress. Evander had borrowed $4 million from Ji Hoon's organization 18 months ago. Private equity positions that had gone catastrophically sideways. The debt had grown. Interest, penalties, the specific arithmetic of owing money to people who do not accept restructuring plans. Evander's repayment strategy had always been Zola's inheritance. He had calculated the timeline to the wedding date like a project manager scheduling a deliverable. "He invited you," Zola said. "Not quite a question." "As a reminder," Ji Hoon said, "that I was watching, that his deadline was real. And instead you married me." "Instead," he agreed, "you married me. Which means the trust fund, when it unlocks, goes to you. And what you do with it is no longer Evander's business." She stared at the city through the glass. It glittered in the early dark like a circuit board running at capacity. "What do you want from me?" "Right now?" "Nothing. You have the certificate. Your inheritance unlocks. We maintain the legal marriage for whatever period satisfies your father's estate requirements, then part ways cleanly." "And Evander?" Something shifted behind his eyes. Not emotion exactly, but the precursor to it. Light changing before weather arrives. "Evander," he said, "is my problem now." She thought she understood what that meant. She didn't. Not yet. She thought she had him figured out by the end of that first night. She was so wrong. It would take 11 days and a boardroom at 32 floors up for the full picture to come clear. She slept 9 hours. She had not expected to sleep at all. In the morning, there were 3 things outside her door. Coffee, black, exactly the right temperature, which meant someone had been paying attention to something she had never mentioned. A folded financial paper with a small item about an unorthodox ceremony, already circulating on social media, and a garment bag. Inside the garment bag, a white double-breasted blazer, high-waisted white trousers. A note in handwriting that was precise and unhurried. The note said, "There is a gala tonight. You will need to be present. JHK." She stood in front of the floor-length mirror in the white suit and felt something rearrange itself in her chest. Not grief, not fear, but the specific sensation of arrival. Like a version of herself that had been waiting behind glass had finally been handed a key and told, "Now." She wore her hair pulled back. She wore her gold earrings, the ones her father had given her the year before the cancer took him. The ones she had nearly left at the chapel in the wrong bag. She wore flat shoes because she had always hated heels and had been wearing them for 2 years because Evander preferred them, and she was completely, permanently done with that particular category of self-erasure. Ji Hoon was in the entrance hall when she came downstairs. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds, the kind of look that doesn't miss anything and returns nothing, and then offered his arm with the calibrated formality he seemed to apply to everything. The gala was 40 floors above the city in a glass tower. The dress code was wealth. The conversation was entirely subtext. The room held people who owned buildings, companies, legislation, and silence in equal measure. They entered together. The room noticed. Not gradually, all at once, like a current reversing direction. Heads turned mid-sentence. Conversation stopped and did not immediately restart. Zola felt 300 eyes land on her and stayed deliberately, perfectly still under the weight of them. Chin level, shoulders back. Her hand resting on Ji Hoon's arm as though she had been walking into rooms like this her entire life and had simply been allowing other rooms for a while. Later, she would overhear 2 men near the bar describe her as the one who married him. The awe in their voices unmistakable. The way people speak about someone who has walked unarmed into a lion's den and been seen walking back out with the lion's full attention. She picked up a glass of champagne. She did not correct them. She made one critical error that first week. She told Ji Hoon's security team to wait at the entrance. She had thought it was assertion, independence. A small, deliberate reminder that she was not a woman who required escorting. What it was, she would understand later, was a gap. And Evander had been watching for gaps the way a man with nothing left to lose watches for anything that might save him. He had called her phone 14 times in 4 days. She knew this because Ji Hoon's people had told her, in the flat, informational tone of people who considered surveillance unremarkable. The same tone they used for weather reports and dinner reservations. He came for her on a Wednesday, in the parking structure beneath her father's estate lawyer's building. She was walking to the elevator when he stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, hollow-eyed, wired, wearing the specific expression of a man who had not slept and had stopped being rational approximately 48 hours prior. He had always been handsome, the kind of handsome that came from discipline, good suits, deliberate grooming, the performance of competence as a second skin. None of that was visible. What was visible was the debt behind his eyes, the animal terror of a man who understood precisely what Ji Hoon Kwon did to people who couldn't pay. "You need to annul it," he said. His voice was compressed, too much pressure in too small a space. "Zola, listen. You have no idea what you've walked into. He is going to use you the same way I was going to use you, except he is better at it, and you will not see it coming." She looked at him. "The way you were going to walk away from me? In a year. After midnight. Once the ink dried?" He grabbed her wrist. The grip was harder than the chapel. Fear, she noted with clinical precision, adds force it, cannot control. "I'm trying to protect you. Evander." The voice came from behind him. It was not loud. It didn't need to be. Ji Hoon had come through the service entrance alone. No associates, no visible backup, which Zola would understand later was deliberate. A statement. He didn't need backup for Evander. Evander did not constitute an escalation. He walked toward them with his hands in his pockets, the overhead fluorescence catching the edge of the ink along his throat, and Evander went rigid in the way of a body responding to signals the conscious mind hasn't processed yet. "You have made contact with my wife twice now," Ji Hoon said. He stopped at a precise distance, close enough to be intimate, far enough to be measured. The mathematics of it were not accidental. "The first time I was lenient. You were emotional. I made allowances." He looked at Evander with absolute academic stillness. "There are no more allowances." Evander released her wrist, left without another word. Footsteps bouncing off concrete until the stairwell door swallowed him. Zola looked at her wrist. A bruise would form by morning. Faint. But there. Ji Hoon looked at it too. Something crossed his face. Not quite anger, but a close, controlled relative of it, the kind of feeling that in another man might have produced a raised voice or a thrown object. In him, it produced 4 seconds of stillness, and then its careful, complete disappearance. "You shouldn't have sent the security team ahead," he said. "I know." A beat of silence. "I won't again," she said. He looked at her. That focused, assessing look she was beginning to recognize as the closest thing he had to a tell, and held out his hand. She took it. She told herself it was practical, transactional, that it meant nothing beyond the stated terms of their arrangement. She almost believed it. Subscribe to keep watching, and drop your location in the comments. I want to say hello to every single one of you. Let's see how far this story travels. The trust fund unlocked at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the estate lawyer's deadline. Zola was at the desk in Ji Hoon's study when the notification arrived. A quiet chime, almost anticlimactic for something she had spent half her adult life positioned to receive. She had expected relief. What arrived instead was the sensation of a door opening onto a room far larger than the one she had been imagining. The cash was there. Substantial, life-altering, the kind of number that permanently changes the geometry of every future decision. But beneath it, buried inside a series of nested shell companies whose names she had to trace backward through 3 layers of incorporation filings, was something else. Something that could not have been assembled by accident, by someone who was simply a retired civil engineer with careful habits. Her father had owned the port. Not a stake, not a minority interest. The North Freight Terminal, the bonded warehouses, along the entire coastal corridor. Licensing rights to 4 of the city's 6 major shipping routes, all of it held quietly inside companies registered under names that meant nothing until you understood what they connected to. Augustine Adeyemi Cross, Sunday church, grilled fish on the veranda, phone calls taken outside at night where the sound of the ocean covered his voice. Quiet men in good shoes who sat with him for an hour and left without staying for dinner. You are more prepared than you know, Zola. For all of it. 2 weeks before the cancer took him. She had thought he meant grief. She understood now that he had meant everything. She closed the portal. She opened it again. She pulled the shipping ledgers and read them from the first page to the last, every entry, every route, every shell company, until the study windows shifted from black to the pale gray of early morning, and her coffee had gone cold, and she held in her hands the complete map of an empire her father had built in the dark, in plain sight, and left to her. Hidden until she was ready to find it. She thought she knew how he would react. She was not entirely wrong, but she was not entirely right either, and the distance between those 2 things was where everything changed. She found him in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, sleeves rolled to the elbow, coffee made, reading something on his phone with the concentrated attention he brought to everything. The tattoos along his forearms were fully visible in the morning light. Intricate, deliberate. A second language written into skin, structured the way serious things are structured. With intention, with consequence, with no space wasted. She set the printed ledgers on the counter in front of him without preamble. My father owned the Northport Terminal, she said, and the bonded warehouses, and the coastal shipping licenses. Ji Hoon set down his phone. He looked at the ledgers. He looked at her. Not with a tactical assessment of the first days, not with the controlled formality of the gala, but with something that recalibrated in real time, like a man revising a very large and previously settled interior calculation. Sit down, he said. I'm not... Zola. The way he said her name, not a command, not impatience, a specific quality of attention, like her name was a word he was still discovering the full weight of. She sat. He read for 11 minutes. She watched him read. His eyes moved fast, precise, returning occasionally to specific lines, the way a surgeon's hands return to the critical site. When he finished the last page, he was still for a moment in the manner of someone who has just rearranged a very large and previously settled interior landscape. Your father, he said finally, was the reason 3 of my competitors couldn't move product north of the harbor for the last decade. He controlled every choke point, every single one. I know, she said. I've been reading. And you're telling me this. She looked at him directly. You're my husband, she said. And the word arrived differently than she had intended. Not clinical, not transactional, but weighted in a way that settled into the space between them and did not lift. And I am not interested in running this alone when running it together is the more efficient option. Ji Hoon looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was not large. It lived mostly in the eyes, brief, unguarded, present for perhaps 3 seconds before it withdrew behind its familiar architecture. But it changed the temperature of the room, and Zola felt it in her sternum like a second heartbeat she hadn't known was possible. "Your father," he said quietly, "would have been extremely difficult to deal with." "He was," she agreed. "I take after him." The distance between them had been closing for days in increments so small, she had been able to ignore each individual one. She could not ignore the sum now. Ji Hoon reached across the counter to turn a ledger page, pointing to a specific entry, and his hand was close enough to hers that the warmth of it was entirely, undeniably present. She did not move away. Neither did he. By the time they surfaced from the ledgers 3 hours later, something had been formalized. Not with paperwork, but with the deeper, wordless kind of agreement that requires no signature because both parties have already signed it in the way they occupy the same space. Evander found his allies the way desperate men always do, frantically, without discrimination, grabbing whatever floated within reach. The Vasquez faction had been trying to break into the northern shipping corridor for 4 years. They had been blocked, consistently, invisibly, by infrastructure they didn't know existed, controlled by a man they had never been able to identify. When Evander came to them with information about the trust fund, the port assets, the woman who had just legally inherited the city's most strategic logistical choke points, they did not need convincing. They needed a plan. Ji Hoon's intelligence came on a Thursday. He read it at the dining table, and when he looked up, something in his expression had sharpened into the specific forward-leaning attention that Zola had learned preceded action. Evander has gone to the Vasquez group. They're planning a legal challenge on the port licenses, fabricated documentation substantial enough to occupy the courts for 18 months. Long enough to install their own operators and make the ownership question moot. Zola was quiet for a moment. "How long do we have?" 10 days. Maybe 12. Then we give them what they think they want. He looked at her. "We look exposed," she said. "The port transfer appears incomplete. The licenses are in dispute. The marriage is visibly fracturing. We give Evander something that looks exactly like leverage, so he brings them to a table. A specific table, in a specific room, on a date of our choosing." A silence. The city pressed against the glass. "You want to set a trap." "I want to end this," she said, cleanly, completely, so that Evander is never again a variable in any equation that involves my life. Ji Hoon studied her with that total familiar attention, the kind she had long since stopped flinching from. Then, all right. They spent the next week being precisely strategically vulnerable. Ji Hoon's lawyers filed a motion that appeared to dispute the port transfer. Zola was photographed twice entering her estate attorney's building alone, expression arranged in the specific register of someone managing a private crisis. A carefully calibrated rumor moved through Evander's circles. The marriage was fracturing. Zola was reconsidering. The window was reopening. Evander, who had always believed what he needed to believe when the alternative was too frightening, believed it. He called a meeting. Downtown boardroom. Neutral ground, he thought. He asked for Zola to come alone. She confirmed she would be there. She did not come alone. The room Evander had chosen was on the 32nd floor of a building he had selected specifically because it was not Ji Hoon's territory. He was wrong about that, but he would not know it until it was too late to matter. He had arranged 6 people around the table, 2 Vasquez lawyers, a financial consultant whose function was legitimacy by association, and 3 men positioned to ensure the room felt like a conclusion rather than a negotiation. Zola arrived at exactly the agreed time. She wore the white suit. She set a single item on the mahogany table, a black leather portfolio closed, thick, and sat at the head with the settled, unhurried authority of a woman who had been sitting at the heads of tables her entire life and was only now, finally, letting the room see it. Evander looked at the empty doorway behind her. He allowed himself a visible, fractional exhale of relief. "Thank you for coming," he said, and the magnanimity in his voice was so thin it was nearly transparent. "I know this isn't easy, but I think you'll find what we're proposing is the cleanest outcome for everyone." "Evander," Zola said pleasantly, "do you know what a debt assignment is?" A small pause. "It's a legal instrument," she continued, opening the portfolio, "by which one party purchases the outstanding debt of another and becomes the new creditor. The debtor's obligations remain identical. Only the name at the top of the ledger changes." She slid a document across the table. He looked at it, then looked again, more carefully, the color leaving his face in a slow and thorough tide. "1 week ago, I purchased your debt from my husband's organization, all 4 million, plus accrued penalties. Filed and registered the following morning." She tapped the document, "which means you don't owe Ji Hoon Kwon anything anymore." Evander exhaled, a fractional, premature relief. "You owe me." The exhale stopped. Mahogany doors opened. Ji Hoon entered without urgency, flanked by 2 men who moved to the room's exits with the practiced efficiency of people who had rehearsed this particular choreography. He did not sit. He came to stand slightly behind and to the right of Zola's chair, not beside her as an equal, not in front of her as a shield, but behind her, in the specific posture of a man indicating, without any ambiguity whatsoever, who the room belonged to. The Vasquez lawyers were already on their phones. The financial consultant had achieved a quality of stillness that suggested he was sincerely reconsidering his career. "The port licenses are fully transferred and registered," Zola continued, her voice carrying the same pleasant, unhurried tone. "Your filing is based on documentation that no longer reflects legal reality. Your challenge will be dismissed within 72 hours. The assets are mine, the marriage is legal, and Evander." She looked at him directly. "You are $4 million in debt to me. Personally." She slid a second document across the table. "The repayment terms are not cash." He didn't pick it up. "You'll work," she said simply, "for as long as it takes, at whatever rate my lawyers determine is fair, performing whatever work my organization requires. You are, as you once told my maid of honor, a business problem, and I have found you a use." The silence in the room was total. Evander looked at Ji Hoon. Ji Hoon looked back with the patient, absolute stillness of a man who had already moved past this moment internally and was simply waiting for reality to arrive. There was nothing left to say. Every exit had been closed before Evander entered the building. He picked up the pen. He signed. Scene 10. The boardroom. After the rain. Evander was escorted out by Ji Hoon's men with the brisk, impersonal efficiency of people removing furniture. The Vasquez lawyers left without speaking. The consultant left without making eye contact. Within 4 minutes, the room held only 2 people, and the particular quality of silence that follows the resolution of something large and long in arriving. Zola closed the portfolio. She straightened the documents, 2 precise movements, and set the pen parallel to the table's edge. Then she sat back in her chair and breathed. Not strategically, not through calculation, just breathed. She had not done that. Not fully, in 11 days. Ji Hoon had not moved from the position behind her chair. She became aware of this the way you become aware of warmth when you have been cold for a long time, not all at once, but in accumulating increments that arrive, finally, as a single undeniable fact. She tilted her head back to look up at him. He was looking down at her with an expression she had no existing category for. Not the tactical assessment of the first days, not the recalibration over the ledgers, not the controlled proximity of the parking structure, something that had dropped all of its architecture, something that was simply him, looking at her, with none of the careful distance he maintained between himself and everything that mattered. "You bought the debt before we set the trap," he said. Not an accusation, a realization arriving in real time. 3 days before, she confirmed. "You didn't tell me." "I needed to know I could do it without you," she said, "before I chose to do it with you." He moved. The movement was so entirely outside the register of everything she had observed from him that she went still, not from fear, but from the instinct that some moments require complete attention. He came around the chair and crouched in front of her, bringing his eyes level with hers, close enough that she could see the fine detail of the ink at his throat, the specific, undefended quality in his expression that she understood instinctively had not been offered to many people. Perhaps never in a boardroom, perhaps never at all. He took both her hands. "I have run this city for 9 years by being the most dangerous person in every room," he said. His voice was quiet in a way she had not heard before, stripped of its customary remove, of its patient and implacable control. "6 days ago, you walked into my kitchen at 6 in the morning and set your father's ledgers on my counter. And I understood, for the first time in 9 years, that I was not the most dangerous person in the room." Zola did not speak. "I told you in the car that I wanted nothing from you. That was the last honest thing I said to you that was also a lie." She turned her hands over in his. "What do you want, Ji Hoon?" He looked at her the way he had looked at her from the back of the chapel. That first look, across the full length of that flower-draped room. The look that had preceded 2 words spoken with the certainty of a man who doesn't ask for what he isn't prepared to keep. "You," he said. "This. Whatever we are when we're not performing it for anyone else." The game city spread below the windows in all its complicated, glittering entirety. The port lights blinked at the northern harbor. The shipping lanes moved with the quiet, purposeful industry of the empire her father had built over 23 years and left for her to find. The streets carried Ji Hoon's authority like current through wire. The whole of it, spread below them like a map of something they had each inherited separately and were only now understanding had always been meant to be read together. Zola stood. Ji Hoon rose with her. She straightened the lapel of his jacket, one small, deliberate gesture, her fingers resting for a moment against his chest, over the heartbeat of a man who had run a city alone for 9 years and had just, for the first time, handed someone the other half of it. "Then let's go home," she said. He offered her his arm. She took it, not practically, not transactionally, not as a performance for any room that still had eyes in it, because she wanted to, because she had finally, completely, irrevocably stopped pretending otherwise. They walked out together. The city waited below. Theirs, entirely, in every direction the eye could reach. And somewhere in a building downtown, Evander picked up the first assignment his new employer had left on his desk. The name at the top of the memo was hers. And that is how Zola Adeyemi Cross walked out of a 32nd floor boardroom with a city. If this story found you, it found you for a reason. Subscribe. Drop your location in the comments. I will love to say hello to every single one of you, just to know how far this story has traveled. Because we are only just beginning.